Hello and welcome to the Armenian News Network Groong Week in Review. This show was recorded on November 21st, 2022. This is Hovik Manucharyan together with Asbed Bedrossian. Before we begin the show, we'd like to request that you subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and subscribe and rate our podcasts, which you can listen to wherever you get your podcasts. All of our Groong links are on our Linktree page, and we'll make sure you can find it on all of our profile pages, so you can click on it and find us on all social media platforms. So if you like our shows, share with your friends and follow us everywhere you're used to getting your news. Thanks, and on with the show. Here are the major topics we'll touch on today. How is Armenia's economy doing? We'll discuss the various aspects of the state of the Armenian economy and briefly touch on the 2023 national budget. Armenia-Azerbaijan Negotiations. The war of words between Pashinyan and Aliyev escalated in the past 2 weeks. We'll discuss the developments since the trilateral summit in Sochi. Also, the French Senate slams Azerbaijani occupation of Armenia. The French Senate recently passed a resolution demanding an end to Azerbaijani occupation of Armenian territory and more. Does this have more than sentimental value in the real world? And lastly, the opposition returns to parliament. The parliamentary opposition has officially returned to parliament. What can be expected? And to talk about these issues, we have with us Hrant Mikaelian, a political scientist and multidisciplinary researcher in social sciences based in Yerevan. He's also a senior researcher at the Caucasus Institute.
Hello and welcome, Hrant.
Hi, Hrant.
Hello, thank you.
Hrant, Armenia's economy is raging forward, according to Pashinyan. Based on statistics from the first 9 months of 2022, Armenia recorded a 14.1% growth in the economy, which is ahead of the 10% inflation the country is predicted to experience in 2022. Pashinyan also touted 143,000 new jobs created in Armenia since he took power in 2018, and a 75% increase in state budget revenues from 2018 to his projected 2023 budget. So he says that Armenia has overcome the economic problems of the COVID pandemic and the war of 2020. So before I go into specific areas, let me lead you in, Hrant. What is not to like here in this picture?
Well, let's start from the point that he says Armenia has overcome the difficulties caused by the war and the pandemic. It is not true. I'll try to explain why. The economy is growing. It is true. And we all know the reason. It's mainly because the external context, and nowadays it's in favor of Armenia, which is good news. But the thing is that the economy contracted in 2020 in one way, and now it's gaining in another. So the fields which had the losses, the problems we had, they are not resolved completely. We have another gains. And it's not the same. Even I would say we had some difficulties even after the 2018 revolution, and mainly in agriculture and in mining industry, and even those are not overcome. So the problem here is that when you count only the gross percentages, it's not the same as if you would dig down into the picture in detail. Now, concerning the budget growth and concerning other stuff, every politician likes to present the economic growth of the country as his own result. And it's in a way normal. But at least if you do so, if you discuss the economic results, if you discuss the statistics, there are some rules to do that. For example, you cannot say the budget has increased by some percentage.
75% since 2018.
And not include the factors which have affected it. For example, the inflation rate. So if you outmeet the inflation rate, it's already like 45 or something. If you outmeet the GDP growth that was projected or that was recorded in the first quarter of 2018, that's 15% more. And if you outmeet several statistical inaccuracies which were registered even before Pashinyan had entered into power, that's 1 or 2% even less. So After all, you get some, let's say, 35% or even less in 4 years, and that's or in 3 years, let's say, that's not as big. Yeah, and
Okay.
after you are trying to understand what happened in reality, and to which extent the budget growth was the result of the Pashinyan's policy, and yes, there is some influence, and also we can say that the shadow economy has decreased, and it's not as significant as you would imply from his speech. The same
Okay.
regarding the growth in a number of working places. You should exclude the seasonal factor and many other things, because the figures as they were presented were purely manipulated.
One point that was missing in the stellar growth figures from Pashinyan was the growth of the GDP. I wanted to ask, Hrant, have you looked at like how much of this growth in the budget is using borrowed money, and is that a right thing to do?
Well, this year we have significant increase in the debt, in the state debt. As of now, it's $10 billion. Although, by part, it's caused by the increase of dram rate, and since there was increase in borrowing on the local market, the the value of the debt increased, and not always the debt itself. But anyway, the indebtedness of Armenian economy grew this year and is continuing growing in the last, let's say, 14 years since 2008, and nothing changed here really. Maybe the rate of growth even increased last couple of years or 3 years. So yes, debt is affecting economic growth, and not only the economic growth but also budgeting. And what is more important, the increasing debt will be a burden for the next generation. So today you can show that you are increasing, let's say, the social commitments of the state, but tomorrow the children and grandchildren will pay. So I would say the following: this year we have really high rates of economic growth. It is really a good news. But even if this year we have significant budget deficit, significant amount of borrowing, and for the next year more than 3% of GDP is projected to be a state debt and be a budget deficit. This is a problem, because the day we will have an economic crisis, which we know appear cyclically, and no one can exclude that the next year it will happen globally and locally as well. Yeah, but the day we have economic crisis, we have to borrow the money. But when we borrow the money, even in periods of economic growth, this implies that our ability to overcome the crisis will be lowered. So I think in a way there is a lot of irresponsible movements and declarations behind all this rhetoric about economic growth, and the policy itself is not completely well balanced.
That's right, Hrant. I think this year we're recording a 14.1%, I believe, increase in the economy, but the projected economy is 7% next year. So I'm going to read between the lines here and say that if the potential is similar to this year, then there's that 7% gap, which is essentially an artificial boost that's flowing into our economy as an artifice of the war in Ukraine, right? As a result of the influx of long and short-term immigrants or tourists, their businesses, bank accounts, their foreign direct expenditures in Armenia's economy. The problem is that this has also led to hyperinflation in some areas, such as real estate and common consumer basket goods. Is this sustainable? What are the risks that you see here?
Well, first of all, if we account for the increase in trade and other fields, we should note that in many ways the increased GDP growth does not connect to Armenian local market, even including the immigrants. Once I've said, I think in our discussions, that Armenia's imports from United States has doubled, and the same did Armenia's exports to Russia. So in a way, it's connected to big things. Now, if we look at, for example, trade in Armenia, the retail trade has increased by 3%. The wholesale trade increased by 30 or 40%, and the external trade increased like by 120%, which is not connected to the local developments, even including the immigrants. So I think if the war in Ukraine is over, and there are some signs to that, although everything might go in different directions. So if this war is over, Armenia will have a problem with all that, because all these flows, financial flows, the goods flows, and so on, they will direct to other markets. Or I don't think Armenia will be the constant market for all this turnover. So ultimately, I think we will lose this boost. So getting the 7% increase over what we have recorded this year will be extremely hard. I will be surprised, to be frank, if it is recorded.
You mean in 2023, right?
Right, right.
Yeah. In fact, the Minister of Finance is predicting a 7% growth, and the Central Bank of Armenia is predicting a 4.5% growth in 2023.
Right, because 4.5% is a long-term economic growth of Armenia, which was recorded like during the last 10 years. But this year, it will be hard to record even 4.5%. I mean, 2023, because we have the high base effect, which will be difficult to overcome. This year, we have recorded, let's say, half of this growth, which was recorded in 2022, is connected to Russia-Ukraine conflict. Now, if you exclude that factor, we are losing the 7% boost. So, I of course, I cannot be sure what will happen the next, but the overall context should roll back to exclude this factor. And so this means that we will have even more modest economic growth than 4.5%, maybe 1 or 2%, and that will stabilize the economy if that is recorded, if the Russia-Ukraine war is over.
The Central Bank of Armenia has continued raising the refi rate, which now stands at 10.5% in Armenia. They seek to bring inflation down to around 4% in 23 from the current 9 to 10% levels. Pashinyan believes that while inflation is real, it's more of a global phenomenon instead of being particular to the Armenian economy. So this government wants to see lower rates in order to spur more economic activity. Hrant, what is your assessment of this classic struggle between government and its central bank? What should be prioritized here? And how should the synergy between Armenia's government and the central bank proceed?
This time I'm on the government side, because in reality, Armenian inflation that was recorded in Armenia is mostly connected to the global developments. We've seen increase in inflation rate in Armenia after the growth of the inflation rate in United States. So and primarily it was recorded in two fields. One was the first was the grocery, and next is the energy. So it's the global inflation that is visible here as well. Now, if you cool down the economy, it will not decrease the inflation to the sufficient rate, because it's not because the economy is overheated per se. Of course, we see some overheat, especially as you said in the property market, but in other fields, economy is not overheated. And the problem is that, yes, it is because of the global developments. Now, how can you locally stop this from happening? I don't know. And another thing is that prioritizing the inflation rate was never a good policy. Armenian Central Bank has set this as a priority since, let's say, mid-2000s at least, and they were targeting inflation at 4% plus minus 1.5. So they are just planning to come back to that policy. So more or less 20 years they are doing the same, and they don't care if the economy is slowing down. That's because Central Bank of Armenia does not have an issue of maintaining economic growth. Many central banks globally have this issue as one of their main goals, but Armenian Central Bank doesn't. It's one of the main issues is the mm, uh, directions of the policy is maintaining financial stability, uh, low inflation, and to pursue a monetary policy in Armenia. So the spectrum of their issues is very narrow, I would say. So that's why they don't care about economic growth. And I think we need to override these rules because, yes, inflation is important and it's already being felt for Armenian citizens. But at the same time, if you slow down economic growth, uh, it does not bring a prosperity to the people. It only increases political stability, but in midterm and long term, it decreases economic growth and political stability as well. So if you are prioritizing inflation at all expenses, this means that you are prioritizing short-term developments over long-term or mid-term developments, which I don't think, which I think is not the right way to go.
So, Hrant, is the central bank prioritizing inflation? Because, like, if it was, wouldn't it, for instance, do more drastic actions to reduce inflation? Like, I think right now they're saying in 1 year they will reduce it to 4%. Is that drastic enough for you, or because the other side of the coin, or I guess the other argument I've heard is that the central bank has not been fast enough in reducing inflation.
Yeah, there was significant amount of criticism in Armenia towards central bank and the government that they did not do enough to decrease the inflation. But let's be real. Today in European Union, inflation is more than 10%. It's higher than in Armenia, while the regular inflation in European Union was about 1%, while in Armenia it was about 3%. So Armenia's increase in inflation rate is much lower than Europe's increase. Okay, we know that there are specific problems there, but also regarding the imported inflation from US, EU, this also means that that it's not a local problem. So you cannot locally overcome the global issue. Now, the thing is that, yes, you can discuss the inflation as a problem, but it should always has its limits. I mean, if the global inflation right now is 10% and Armenia has like 9 or 10%, what can you do next? You can struggle to decrease it even more, but this way you might harm the economy at all. Because, for example, today we have increased dram rate to dollar, which is about 400 dram per dollar, and it is already a big problem not only for exporters but also for local producers and for the sectors which are exporting the services like IT or tourism, and these sectors also are already struggling because this increased dram rate. Now, another thing is that increased dram rate slows down economic growth and slows down the labor market because it increases the price of the local workforce, and the price of the local workforce increases, but salaries do not, because dram dollar rate increased in favor of dram, and dram euro rate increased to like 35% or even more, and at the same time there is inflation in Armenia which is comparable to the growth in salaries. So locally people did not gain anything, but goods produced in Armenia have increased in price at European market by like 1/3, which means they are not competitive anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So at least midterm, we will have a problem with a labor market because of this policy. And this policy was intended to decrease the inflation rate, but it did not. So even increasing dram towards dollar by 20-25% and towards euro by 30-35%, even that did not lead to zero inflation, which would imply because most of goods consumed in Armenia are imported. So here is another problem, which is when dram rate will go down back to its, let's say, normal rate at around 480, then we will have significant inflation. Another thing is that dram is stuck to dollar and also to ruble. Let's take a look at the history of exchange rate of dram towards dollar. In late 1994, $1 costed like 415 dram, and now it's about 400. Of course, there were significant fluctuation, but fluctuations in this 28-year term. But at least ultimately, we can say that dram was more or less stick to the dollar. Now, let's take a look at ruble. This year, ruble has increased towards dollar, and there were several reasons for that in Russia, because some goods were banned for importing to Russia, and Russians wanted to overcome these restrictions, and also the intensity of foreign trade and capital flow to Russia and out of Russia especially was reduced, which led to increase in ruble rate towards dollar. But Armenian central bank simultaneously increased dram rate towards dollar. I don't think that's good policy as well. So I think if we are talking about financial stability, it does not mean that financial stability does not imply that dram should not decrease towards dollar only, but it should not also increase towards dollar as well, because that's also not financially stable policy, I would say.
Hrant, despite all the good news announced, the agro sector, which is very important in Armenia, was down 0.7%. I've seen a lot of complaints by farmers in the Armenian press about a lack of governmental support for their efforts. Meanwhile, despite reports that many IT companies are losing money because of the exchange rate fluctuations that you just mentioned, the government is super bullish on the IT sector, and it claims that in the next 3 to 4 years, it will become the largest sector in the Armenian economy, surpassing even the mining industry. So it looks like IT companies will receive some temporary tax credits to lessen the impact of the appreciation of the dram. But these are temporary measures, and in the long term, unless the dram depreciates again to the right levels, the cost of labor is now significantly higher and makes Armenian IT companies less competitive globally, just like you said. The IT sector is important, right? We all want it to thrive, but it's not the large part of the labor market in the Armenian economy, at least not today. Meanwhile, the agro sector affects a large segment of the population. So it seems to me that in order to shift gears and modernize the Armenian economy, the government is applying somewhat of a, this is my term, shock treatment to the labor market. Are we reading this right? Is the government supporting its vision to modernize with the appropriate investment in infrastructure, industry sectors?
Well, I think, generally, in a big scale, it's a continuation of the policy which Armenia had the last 30 years, based on a neoliberal approach that government should not intervene into economy much. Although we see that developed countries do not follow these policies much, even United States, which is the least intervening economy, but still they intervene much more, at least to assure that the labor market is growing, that the real sector is growing, and so on and so forth. Now, in Armenia, situation is different. Government never took care much about labor market. That's first issue. Another issue that the government never took care about the, let's say, primary sector, especially if we're talking about agro sector.
Mm-hmm.
But at least during previous government considered agro sector as at least a socially responsible sector.
Right.
And the policies there were directed so that at least people in the villages would have adequate income.
Yeah, through
Now what
subsidies,
we
I
have
guess.
here, through some subsidies, through some policies which were directed towards increase in the
In
size
their
of
crops and stuff.
in size of crops and
But
so
this
on.
is exactly where I've read a lot of complaints that the government is not supporting the farmers.
Yeah, now what changed last 4 years since Pashinyan government entered, of course. First of all, they closed the agriculture ministry, and some duties of agriculture ministry were directed to the Ministry of Economy, but it's significantly more limited than the activities which were conducted by the agriculture ministry.
Yeah.
Also because agriculture ministry was working countrywide, working on the field, while the Ministry of Economy is writing regulations. It's completely different in its nature, so they are not able to conduct all the things which agriculture ministry was doing. That's the first thing. Second thing is that they're always delaying the water usage from Sevan, and not only that, generally the water crisis in the world is affecting Armenia as well. So they did not find any good idea to combat that, and that's also affected agriculture, especially in the field of plant growing. So this is another issue we have, and generally agriculture is considered unimportant field of economy because they are more, let's say, productive fields, and that's why they don't want to invest in agriculture. And here I think it's a big mistake because considering agriculture a field only which requires subsidies, which is very unproductive sector, is a big mistake. First of all, because yes, Armenian agriculture is not very productive, but this also means that there is a big potential to increase the productivity and thus increase the amount of products.
And also the level of self-sufficiency for the country.
Yeah, that's also a strategic issue. But generally, if we look at the amount of lands which are in use, it's about 50 to 55% of the whole stock of land in Armenia. So at least there we can have a significant gain, and then the productivity grows, which can be achieved in rather short or mid-term. And this all means that if approached properly, agriculture can bring significant increase in production level. So the overall approach that if agriculture generally is less productive than IT, that it does not need any investment, it's a wrong approach, and
Right.
that is why I think we don't. But this wrong approach is widespread, especially among these governments. Initially, they were talking about only IT sector. Now they started talking about manufacturing industries, which is right way to go. But first, you should start with agriculture, and then you should talk about the manufacturing, and only then you should talk about IT, because IT, despite the crisis and despite the drum rate, IT is growing. Why it is growing? Because it's a very good international conjuncture for this field, and IT did not suffer because of 2020 crisis connected to the coronavirus and lockdowns, because IT is not vulnerable to lockdowns, let's say. Yeah. So that's why IT is skyrocketing, and it is projected to grow, and it is growing right now. But also this means that IT does not require any state support at all. But also the change in tax rates, which occurred in 2020 or since 2020, the flattening the tax rate also prioritizes the IT sector in reality.
Okay.
Which is okay, which is not bad, but I mean, we need to prioritize other sectors as well, or even primarily, because there is more workforce there and there are more vulnerable people there.
Hrant, regarding the IT sector, I have been obviously involved in it in the past and a decade ago, and even at that time, companies were feeling the stress of the lack of availability of labor in the market. So when they make the audacious claim that in 3-4 years the IT sector is going to be the largest sector of the Armenian economy, how are they planning on doing that? Are you seeing any investments in education or any investments that would help ramp up the sort of labor force, which I see as a prerequisite for more growth in this sector?
To my knowledge, everything which is done in this field is being done by the companies themselves. So they are pushing to increase in quality of the education in the technical field, and they finance some universities, and this way, and also since it is already visible for the general populations that IT sector is growing and the salaries are high there, many young people go there. So maybe they will not be very talented, or they will not be, let's say, not bring lots of added value, but at least as a workforce in IT sector, as a regular coders or something, I don't think we will have a lack of supply. Another issue is that whoever gets to IT sector, many of them leave Armenia, and let's say one day you get a new specialist, and the next day he leaves Armenia, and then you have to grow a new specialist, and that's also a big problem, because Armenia always has only, let's say, entry level specialists here in Armenia locally, and when they grow, they leave the country.
Yeah, in effect, the net effect is very much lower than it could be strategically, and I was hoping to hear some positive news regarding strategic alignment between government education policy and the needs of IT, but I guess we'll keep on hoping for that.
We'll get to that one in the 23 budget, because one of the priorities, one out of 4 priorities that they've specified, is education and science. So probably IT falls into that.
So let's talk about the budget then.
Okay, let's briefly talk about the 2023 budget then. It was proposed by the Pashinyan government and passed by the Pashinyan parliament. The priorities in the budget are social assistance, which is around 25% of the budget, and it is up 12% over this year. Security and defense, which is going to be 20% of the budget, and it's supposedly up 35% over this year. Infrastructure, 11% of the budget, plus 9% over this year. And actually, I'm not quite clear what they want to do with the infrastructure. Maybe they're going to increase travel agencies and hotels in Armenia, which is what they were talking about over the last couple of days. And the 4th priority, which they've mentioned, is education and science, which is 10% of the budget, and it is up 10% over the current year. So as we noted, the government projects 7% economic growth and has proposed a $6.4 billion spending budget on an estimated budget revenue of $5.6 billion. Hovik, we're probably going to need to do a show just on this topic in the future to understand and drill down on this thing. Hrant, what stands out for you in this budget? Can you give us a kind of a high-level view of your thoughts?
Well, let's start from the budget deficit.
Mm-hmm.
As you've said, it's $800 million projected for the next year, and I think this is big problem. If you are projecting a big budget deficit for the year when you are expecting 7% economic growth, there is a problem with planning. So I think the government has to be more modest in its spendings this time, because in reality, we might have an economic crisis even the next year or the year after. And if we are collecting new debts now, how can we attract new finance when we need them, when we really need them? So that's the first issue.
Yeah.
Second issue is, when discussing the budget of Armenia and discussing it in US dollars, there is a big if. If dram dollar rate is the same as it is now, yes, then it is about $6 billion, the budget.
Mm-hmm.
But if dram devaluates back to 480, which I expect to happen in the next year or maybe even this year, I don't know exactly, but I expect this to happen because the enormous inflow of currency continues to Armenia, and
Right.
it will stop one day, and the next day they will have to fix the rate back. So this way we should consider that the budget in reality will be like 1 billion less, 1 billion or even more.
That makes sense.
In dollars, yeah. Now the next thing to consider is that since we are comparing the budget to the current budget, and current budget was mainly projected the late 2021. Maybe there were some changes, but I don't think there were major.
Mm-hmm.
We should exclude that 10% or 9% inflation rate, which we have now. So in reality, all these increases are not very significant, except to the expenses on defense, which is important for sure. And I hope these expenses will be effective, which I don't see, to be frank, yet. So with expenses on defense, it is very important what kind of defense system we will get ultimately. As of now, we have 2 years of talks about that, but the army quality has and its ability to defend the country has degraded very significantly, after 2020 war. Yeah, even after 2020 war. So even in December 2020, Armenian army was better than now. So the increase in expense does not bring increased quality of army, better army. So better army is first of all institutional reform, and it's also a discipline, and it's also an infrastructure, military infrastructure, and it's many things, and also equipment and so on. So we should see what they will do, but I don't expect much.
So, Hrant, do you think that the proposed a budget for defense is actually adequate in 2023?
Well, budget figure is adequate.
Okay.
How they will spend it
is
I'm
key,
not sure it will
critical.
be adequate. Because what we have seen, for example, the equipment which they are planning to buy from India. It is good that we have military connections with India. But what I see is that the equipment which has not been tested in real world, but costs high price. We are acquiring this equipment, and I'm not sure this is good investment. And even if it is, we need to understand the whole plan of investment in military. Because if the military budget is increasing by, let's say, $300 million or so, it is very important how this money will be spent. So with the military expenses, I also have doubts. So yeah, the amount of military expense is obvious, it's growing, and we need to increase the expense, but how it will be spent and what the defense system we will get, that's a big deal. And concerning education, education should be priority of Armenian government, but we have a big problem here because last not even years but decades, education was discussed as a potential priority, but in reality was never a priority. That's why the share of expenses on education, both in budget and in GDP, was decreasing. So I hope it will increase the next year, but I'm not even sure that the share of the budget expenses on education will increase the next year as well. So if we are talking about 10% increase, that's only compensation of inflation. So, for example, if you have, let's say, salaries and the salaries in the education field, they comprise most of this amount. I think, yeah, that will be compensation of inflation, which is, yes, it is a must, but it does not resolve all the issues. Now, concerning the social.
But Hrant, I'm not sure if the pension increases and the salary increases are part of the education budget or part of the social spending budget. It's not clear to me from looking at the.
Yeah, salary increases are part of the education budget, while pension increases are part of the social security budget. Now, salary increases in the education field in schools, for example, and in universities, if they are like 10%, yeah, still it's good, it's important, it compensates the inflation, but it does not bring any new quality. So the real salary does not grow this way. So we have problems. The problem is that Armenia has an issue with finances, as always, has budget deficit, even in the year when it's when there is a big economic growth projected, as at least by the government, by the entity which has projected this budget. And at the same time, we still run short to meet the needs of many sectors, many fields. But the main issue is how effective this money will be spent. Let's see. We can only check in the end.
And okay, let's switch topics to geopolitics. In the aftermath of Sochi in the past couple of weeks, the war of words between Pashinyan and Aliyev has become sharper and more strident. While Aliyev continues the usual barrage of threats, the use of force, and other quote-unquote era of peace tactics, Pashinyan, who usually does not respond in kind, has come back with his own salvo, accusing Aliyev of plotting genocide against Armenians of Artsakh, breaching their agreement to refrain from the language of threats and use of force, and making sort of other, I would say, arrogant statements. Most of this newfound temerity comes since the trilateral summit in Sochi, where Putin stated that the Western peace proposals left Artsakh in Azerbaijan, but Russia's plan postponed the status definition to a future generation. Putin also achieved a trilateral statement emphasizing the non-use of force and continuation of negotiations based on the existing agreements since November 2020. I wanted to ask Hrant, your thoughts on this post-Sochi development. Do you believe that the Sochi gave Pashinyan more room to maneuver vis-a-vis Aliyev and the West?
I think that Sochi gave Putin some room to maneuver vis-a-vis the West, but not Pashinyan himself. Because Pashinyan's ultimate goal, from what I could understand from his statements and his policy, is to get rid of Artsakh. The problem for him is that Aliyev demands more. In reality, Aliyev demands Syunik as well. It does not demand Syunik to become a formal part of Azerbaijan, but the rate of his statements include the restoration of historical Azerbaijani presence there, including demographic presence, and then also the roads. And the roads do not include only one road, but the whole bunch of roads. In addition, pipelines and so on. So they want to gain as much control over Syunik as possible. And they already established so-called Zangezur-Göyçe Republic, which means in reality Azerbaijan already has an official claims towards Armenia. And if you analyze the statements by Ilham Aliyev, you will see that. So that means that for Aliyev, Artsakh is not enough. And I think this is biggest issue of Pashinyan. Another issue is that as of now, there are two confronting plans, the Western plan and the Russian plan. And the problem is that it already became an issue of geopolitics. So if prior to 2020, Russia and the West were more or less cooperative in the Karabakh settlement, as of now, they are competing. And theoretically, it could bring some possibilities to Armenia, but from what we see now, it only brought possibilities to Azerbaijan, because Azerbaijan's diplomacy was more effective, because they had strategic goals, and because they were pushing their own agenda, which Armenia did not.
So yeah, in fact, in relation to that competition, in the past week, we saw U.S. Secretary of State Blinken call both Pashinyan and Aliyev. He called Pashinyan first and basically tweeted about it, saying that he exhorts them to continue negotiations and not to miss the opportunity for settling their disputes, and basically not to slow down. This sort of statement from Blinken, do you believe it is in response to, I guess, Putin's maneuvering here? In the end, right now, where do Armenia and Azerbaijan stand? Are they sort of ready to quit the Western?
I think generally the sides have selected Western plan. Aliyev himself several times has stated that Western plan is better for him, mainly because Western plan does not imply the postponing Karabakh issue and resolving it right now. And concerning Pashinyan, he had made several statements before the Sochi meeting that he is ready to sign a peace agreement and so on and so forth, which people understood that he is ready to give up everything. So Blinken's statement is, of course, a reply to meeting in Sochi. We can remember that John Kirby has made a statement before that meeting that there is no need in such meetings. So U.S. Is concerned about the Russian-led process, which is being held simultaneously, because in United States they hope they can gain a momentum and become a main mediator and rule out Russia of this region. So for United States, this is an important point, not anything else. Now concerning the statement itself by Blinken is that Armenia might lose the chance or something. In reality, we should understand one thing, and I think both you understand that clearly, that there is no peaceful settlement on the table. In reality, the only thing is which is happening is that Armenia is getting ready to sign a new capitulation agreement, which is full capitulation instead of partial capitulation, which was signed in November 2020. So this is very important. In this so-called peaceful process, both on Russian and the Western track, Armenia does not have anything to gain, and that's primarily because of this government and how they are pursuing their diplomatic agenda and so on. So the problem is that it's not diplomatic process at all, because Aliyev is pushing militarily, trying to fasten this process, and he does not agree on anything. That's why even with Western plan, he has a problem, because he wants to gain more here and there. So he gained very good appetite after all these things which happened in last 4 years. So now he tries to get even better, get himself in a better position, and in reality, he is preparing to the new war. If we analyze all the policy which Azerbaijan is conducting last 2 years, this is obvious that they are preparing to a new war, regardless of what is being prepared on the diplomatic track. So they are developing military infrastructure towards Armenia very quickly and very intensively, and they are also increasing their military spendings, and it's very big amount. And let's not forget that 2 months ago, Azerbaijan had started a large-scale military attack against Armenia, which has stopped, but it can be resumed.
Yeah.
So
the bodies are still in the ditches, unfortunately.
yeah. So in reality, there is not even 1% change for any peaceful settlement. So it's only one way directed process, and Azerbaijan got a momentum with big help of Turkey. But we should understand that Armenia is only losing in this process. And by the way, and by the way, not even Russian plan and of course not Western plan are not beneficial for Armenia in any way. Only Russian plan is not as bad, but still is very bad. Also based on this, the last statement, which was in many ways similar to the Washington statement, which leaked to the press like a couple of months ago, and which means that Azerbaijan diplomatically won in all the fields. So it's not that much about Russia and the West for us, for Armenia. It's more about Armenia and Azerbaijan, and this is the track where we are losing.
So in this current phase of discussions, Hrant, while Pashinyan has been repeating his determination to sign a so-called peace agreement, like you said, he's also saying that Baku needs to talk to Artsakh authorities and reach an agreement that is acceptable to the Armenians of Artsakh. Aliyev said that he's ready to negotiate directly with Stepanakert, but not with Rupen Vartanian, and he called Vartanian a Russian agent. The authorities in Artsakh have rejected the bilateral format of negotiations with Azerbaijan and have insisted on an internationally mediated platform. Actually, Phil Rieker also said during congressional hearings that there must be an internationally visible, quote unquote, internationally visible mechanism for direct negotiations. Can this format have any success? Is it a replacement for the OSCE-MG, which has died currently?
Well, we can remember that in the frame of OSCE-MG, Artsakh was involved, like up until, in reality, 1996. Yeah, after Lisbon summit, there was no negotiation with participation of Artsakh. So, in reality, yes, we have a problem with Artsakh participation, but the main issue is the status of Artsakh participation there, because Baku implies two ways of communication with Artsakh. One is that the way of communicating between the central authorities and regional authorities, and another is negotiation between Armenians and Azerbaijanis of Artsakh, which is more corresponding to Azerbaijan's narrative of the conflict. But anyway, none of these formats has anything to do with current de facto status of Artsakh, which is still a state, although very, very vulnerable state, but still a state.
So how does it relate to the Russian plan, which wanted to delay the status of Artsakh? I think Putin said to leave it to a future generation, basically.
Yeah, in reality, this means that Russia has no plans for Artsakh. Russia feels itself very weak to manage the issue right now, and found itself in a weaker position than it would think like a year before. And they don't know how to deal with Ukraine, and they are not able to deal simultaneously with several issues. And this is why they want to postpone the Karabakh issue. Now, concerning Baku and Ankara, in reality, because when we are talking about Baku, we should talk about Ankara. I'm saying this very boldly especially because of the latest leaks of one of Azerbaijani colonels, which was also discussing the extent of Turkish involvement in the war of 2020, and not only that. So in Ankara, they understand that Russia is weak right now, and now is the best time to deal with Karabakh, with Armenia, because Russia is not able to adequately response. And they are pushing and very successfully pushing on negotiations. But the main issue is that Armenia is not doing anything because, okay, Azerbaijan on its side is pursuing its agenda. What is Armenia doing? Because when Armenians say we are expecting that Russia will do something, it means that we don't understand how the diplomatic process should go. And also concerning Russia, if we are expecting that Russia will defend our interests, this means that we are giving Russia the right to do whatever it wants with Karabakh, because Russia itself can only defend Russian interests by its nature. So if we are giving up our influence on Karabakh issue, this means that the issue will become an issue between Russia and Turkey.
Yeah.
And how they will resolve this issue, it is already clear. So this is unacceptable, of course, that any mediator can become the main figure of this negotiation and Armenia can wash its hands. Now, concerning Artsakh, if Artsakh is only is opposed to Baku and has no Armenia's backing, and there is no clear international format, it means that these relations will be already asymmetrical. There is no chance to change the situation if the asymmetrical process has started.
Right.
That's why it's very important the nature of the process, how it will go.
Okay, and very briefly, last week the First Senate nearly unanimously passed a resolution on Artsakh. Among other things, it reaffirmed its previous recognition of Artsakh, called for sanctions against Azerbaijan, and called for opening a cultural office in Stepanakert. What are your thoughts about this development, and what real impact do you think it will have on the ground in Artsakh and in the negotiations process?
I don't know very much about this, but what I can say that this is a good and lost opportunity for Armenian diplomacy. That's what I can say for sure, because yes, there are disagreements between between French Senate and French government, for example, but we have seen how, for example, Ukrainian government acted in such situations in different countries, and this is a great possibility. Also, because the narrative which was put under this resolution in French Parliament could be used internationally. Also, we can remember the European Parliament resolution on cultural evaporation of Armenian culture from Artsakh or from occupied territories of Artsakh, which was adopted like half year before, and it was also a good opportunity which was lost. So again, I think it is not about Russia West. It's about Armenia and Azerbaijan, this track, and Azerbaijan diplomatically wins because it wants to. They have a motivation. They have plans. They have strategy, and they want to win. Now, Armenian government does not want to win, and it does not face, by the way, Armenian government strong opposition to this policy. There is opposition, many disagree, etc., but still they are able to follow this policy, which means even if Pashinyan says that agreeing with Azerbaijan means genocide, in reality that's what he said, but he's still talking about peace agreement. So in reality, his rhetoric about the possible genocide of Artsakh Armenians, it's empty rhetoric. He does not do anything to confront Azerbaijan. Instead, he follows Azerbaijani agenda because following this so-called peaceful process is Azerbaijani agenda. Now, if you don't confront this narrative, if you don't do anything, how are you preventing this genocide? Instead, you are making this genocide possible. So this is a big issue, I think. And again, on its side, Armenia lost every possible opportunity there, and we cannot blame anyone except ourselves.
lastly, Hrant, let's talk about the internal political scene. The opposition is now officially resuming its participation in the parliamentary discussions. They claim that they never left. They were there for for other type of work, but they were just sort of refusing to be in the hall to discuss issues that they deemed unnecessary or unimportant considering the overall agenda and the overall sort of situation we're in. But now they're back, and I wanted to get your opinion on how would you assess the opposition's activities over the last maybe 6 months? Were they correct to hit the streets and try to achieve change in government that way? And what led them to go back? And do you think it was the right step to do right now?
Well, if we look at public discourses around opposition's return to the parliament, we can see that many people were condemning opposition, some were making fun of opposition, and many did not care. So, in reality, opposition is losing any ground in the society, which is very bad sign, not only for the opposition itself, but also for the whole political life of Armenia, and especially for Artsakh issue, because this government, we have discussed which policies this government has in Artsakh direction. So the opposition being this weak is really big issue for Armenia. Now, why it is so weak? First of all, it does not have any plan. When they were leaving the parliament, they did not have any plan of what to do if they fail. That's first issue. And the decision of leaving the parliament was emotional decision because they were pushed by the government, by the civil contract party, and so that opposition had to, let's say, react somehow. They left the parliament, and they thought they can overthrow the government.
Yeah, and in fact, let me remind our listeners, when they left the parliament in early May, they did so after Pashinyan's speech about lowering the bar in negotiations. Since then, he has said much more worrisome things, explicitly acknowledging sort of Artsakh as part of Azerbaijan, or threatening to do so by signing the peace, so-called peace treaty, and so forth. But now, I guess they're back. But I guess sort of my question is like, let's ignore. We're starting off in November 2022, and we have what we have. Is this a chance for the opposition to go back and try to sort of consolidate its forces and come up with new solutions, or should they have gone for more drastic measures on the streets?
I think it's not the issue of doubling down or having a soft line. The issue is that these politics should be competent. First of all, they should have a conceptual alternative to this government political line, because what they have is a disagreement with the government, not the alternative. That's the first issue. They disagree, but they don't have their own plan.
Right.
And they say when we'll be in the government, when we will overthrow them, then we will decide. It does not work like that, because people who should support the opposition, they don't know what to support, and opposition itself doesn't know what should those people support, because they don't have any plan. And let me tell the truth, as of now, even if they get the power at some point, which is not a viable option right now, but even if it happens, even that time they will not have no plan. So this is big issue, because planning starts not from the getting government, but beforehand. So that's first issue. Another issue, that this opposition has already rather big track record of losing its political campaigns. And let's start from November 2020. Then the movement resumed in February 2021. Then there was another movement which also stated a goal to overthrow the government, which started in November 2021. And then May, June 2022. So 4 movements have failed. And that's already rather big track record of failed movements. So people don't see how this opposition can win in any instance. They lose in media, they lose in discourses, they lose in the streets. So here it's also a big issue. And the last but not least, it's that the opposition not only is not united, but behind this public and media attacks against opposition returning, we could see some other opposition parties attacking another opposition parties. So even we could see it between representatives of, let's say, Republicans and the Kocharian bloc, who were attacking each other. Not to mention that Kocharian bloc, if it exists at all, that's another big issue, because if it is one single actor. So I think opposition has a lot of things to do before claiming it can overthrow the government, regardless of what high issues we have in around Artsakh. If opposition is unable to pursue these goals, it only makes achievement of these goals worse. So before you have conceptual alternative, before you have good strategy, getting to the streets does not resolve any issue. And before getting to the streets, you need to at least have good street movement strategy as well, which they also don't have. I mean, politics on the go. Politics is not made on the go. That's the biggest issue with this opposition.
All right. We're going to leave it there for today. Thank you very much, Hrant. Thanks for all of your insight.
Yeah, thank you, Hrant. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Asbed. Thanks, Hovik.
That concludes our program for this Week in Review episode. We hope it has helped your understanding of some of the issues from the previous week. We look forward to your feedback and your suggestions for issues to cover in greater depth. Contact us on our website at groong.org or on our Facebook page ANN-Groong or in our Facebook group Groong-Armenian News Network. Special thanks to Laura Osborne for providing the music for our podcast. On behalf of everyone in this episode, we wish you a good week. Don't forget to subscribe to our channels, like our pages, and follow us on social media. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.